Cool. You started your career in private equity and now you write on X focused on mindsets, confidence, dating, and investing advice. We'll go deep into it. All right. But anyways, how are
Let's
you?
do it. I'm great. I'm great. I'm
All right.
happy to be here. Excited to be here.
Let's go. Where can we begin? Let's begin with what was your recent post on X?
I don't know. I spam the internet with my thoughts, but actually, here's a good one. So today, Chris Paul went back to the Clippers to do like a farewell tour, and they ended up cutting him,
Okay.
which is brutal. And I think like it's an important lesson that unfortunately there's no loyalty in the corporate world because it's not like a personal thing, but like if you think about private equity or finance, right? Like it's a business decision, and that might mean that they'll have to let you go, even if they don't want to, right? Like your boss or your MD is getting, orders from someone above him. And the only thing I would say is like, I think people get really attached to careers and stuff. And it's important to understand that, it's fragile and you have to kind of turn the ultimate thing is turn yourself into the ultimate asset so that you have opportunities.
Totally. I'm really curious. When did that click for you that, okay, you don't want to go all in on private equity and maybe there's an opportunity to do something of your own?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess like, the place I would think to start this, like I always talk about how when I was 25, I went through a quarter life crisis. I was working in private equity. I was 5 years into my career. This was 2020. And so it was really valuable because you got to actually look into the lives of the people above you. Like we were having Zoom calls like this. It used to be you had meetings in their office, and now you're basically having a meeting with them in their living room. And like they obviously had fine lives and stuff, but like it's just this interesting thing of like, okay, I think when you're young, you're taught to follow this path, get the best grades you can. I mean, it honestly starts in high school, right? You're groomed to go to the best college you can. In college, it's like, okay, get good grades, join at USC where I went. It's called the Trojan Investing Society. Do that. And then like, if you do well enough in that, you should get like a super day and interviews from there. And so you do banking for 2 years, and then it's like, I'm going to go to private equity basically before you've even done banking. And you're just taught that if you keep staying on this path, eventually you're going to get the keys to the castle. And for me, there were two things. Like I really do love investing. That is still one of my core passions that's what I do on a daily basis in terms of the public markets. And like right away, you kind of realize there's like a difference in private equity between investing and doing deals. There's a pressure to do deals, to deploy capital, to raise bigger funds, to increase AUM. That that maybe it sometimes comes to a head with investing. And so that was interesting. In the same way, like I like to just be a long-term investor, right? Like I'm trying to own the best businesses. It's not like this, in private equity, there's this cadence of you buy a business, you sell it 5 years later, you have to buy another business. It's not like the best businesses come along every 5 years
Right.
like that.
Right.
And it's almost like sometimes better to just hold on to the business that you have. It's like the grass isn't always greener, whether that's with businesses, relationships, whatever. And so, point being, I remember we were doing diligence on the company. I think it was the 4th of July weekend. My boss was in Hawaii on a family trip, and we had a 4-hour diligence call that he took from the closet of his hotel room on a family trip while his family was at the pool. And I just remember this was like a kind of pretty jarring thing because it's like you're told that if you just stay in it long enough, if you work hard enough for 20 years, you'll eventually be a partner and you'll have the keys to the castle, right? And this is not a knock on anyone or their lives, but it's like, is that the is that the castle?
Is that what I want?
Is that what you want? And it's like they obviously make a bunch of money, but for me, money isn't great unless it's giving you the freedom to do something with that money.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. And at that time, what path was in your mind? What path did you think that if this is not it,
Yeah.
where do I go from here?
Well, what's fascinating is, you first start to think like, okay, I'll just go to a different private equity fund. Or maybe I'll do maybe it's
Yeah.
not private equity that I like, maybe it's venture.
Yeah.
And, so it basically was a 2-3 year journey of all this because at first you just start like, all right, let me just go change teams. And, each team has their pluses and minuses. Some have better cultures, some do more interesting deals, all that. But then it's like in going through enough interviews and meeting with enough people, you realize it's all the same. No matter what, like you can't really play the game that much differently. If you want to be in private equity, you're in the same banker led processes. No matter no matter the firm you're signing your emails off on.
Hmm.
And this was really interesting because that was, I think, the hardest part is like, then you had to realize like, all right, I got to like have a step function change in how I'm approaching this and how I'm approaching life. And that was really where like my journey began, because that is like when you have to take a step off and be like, okay, there's nothing, or not to say there's nothing over in this path, but like we've done enough over in this path. It might be way over here, and it's been quite the journey to go from where I was there, a daily basis, doing financial models, diligence, all this, to now creating content and sharing what I've learned. That's on the complete other end of the spectrum. You even think about the skills. Like I have no idea how to create content. Like I just got a bunch of stuff for the studio that I made and like making lighting and all that. And so that's kind of the best place you can get to though, is like, I remember talking to my dad. He gave me two really good pieces of advice because I went to him. I'm like, hey, I'm lost. I don't know what to do. And he was like, great, figure it out. I was like, oh, perfect. Thanks, man. That was super helpful. But that actually is the best advice, because he told me, he's like, look, you're 25, you went to a great school, you've got great names on your resume, you've got great experiences, you've got a great network, you've got tons of skills, you're hardworking, you're smart. What do you want to do? You're in the open ocean and you can do whatever you want.
Hmm.
What do you want to do? Right. And I think like when you're ingrained and following this path, you don't really ever pick your head up to think about that. Right. And like, I don't want anyone to think I'm knocking finance or banking, because my best advice to people is definitely to go into those careers. And I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful for all the learning experiences, the people I met. Like I really actually miss, even when I was at Lazard working those super late hours, like that was probably those were some of my favorite memories from being in my 20s, was in the bullpen. Right. And so like, full stop, I recommend everyone to doing these career paths. But I think at a certain point, you do have to pick your head up and think deeply about what it is that you want to do. And as it relates to that, the other piece of advice that my dad gave that was super helpful is, I remember we were golfing and he was like, hey, I'm worried that you're too focused on finding the right answer about what you want to do next. And I was like, of course, like obviously. And he's like, that's not the right way to think about it, because there is no right answer. There's no like perfect thing, or even like in relationships, there's no perfect person. You work to make relationships perfect. You work to make things right. And if you're getting signals that it's not right, then just that's not right and go try the next thing. And I was like, okay, well, then if that's the case, why does no one try anything? Why do people stay in these careers that they don't like? The default is not that you see people running all these experiments and trying things all the time, right? It's usually they're staying in jobs they don't like. And he just said, because people are scared. And that was helpful because I then stopped putting so much pressure on myself, because I think what people struggle with is like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do for my career? And you'll never figure out what you want to do with your career. I was 25 at the time. A long, great career is 40 plus years. That's almost twice as long as I've been alive. I'm never going to figure that out. And all you have to figure out maybe where you want to get in 5 years. What might you want to be doing? And then figure out the next best step to get you from where you are to where you want to go. And just break it down like that, and bite by bite, just keep following what's most interesting to you. And if those paths go cold, no problem. Try something else. I think a lot of people get stuck because if you're in finance, if you're in private equity, consulting, sales, right? All of us, like we have so many interests. And so you're lost not from a lack of interest or not knowing what to do, but rather you have too many things that excite you. And that creates the friction, and that's the challenge of the search. And the way I think about it is try to live all these parallel lives. Like when I was 25, this was back in 2020, like crypto and Web3 was really big, right? And I actually got an opportunity to be like the chief investment officer of a crypto fund. And, so I was like, okay, like I think all of us are new and trying to onboard ourselves to crypto. And so for like the next 6 months, I'm like, I'm going to pretend as if I'm the CIO of this crypto fund. Every morning, I'm going to be reading stuff about crypto, right? And you do that long enough and you realize, I don't think this is like what I'm actually interested, or I don't think I'm ever going to have an edge in this stuff. And that's a good answer, right? And I tell people to do this. Like, if you think you might be interested in, like, fully try it out and you'll learn your answer. Because if after 6 months it still feels like work to you, it's not coming natural, you're not jumping out of bed excited, it's like, that's not your path. Then go try something else, right? And the way to do that is like you just try to do as many different things at the same time so that you can walk further down the path, so that you can get better information, so you can make a more informed decision. It's like you're standing at the entryway to a jungle and there's all these paths trying to lead you to where you go. And you just see 9 paths and you're like, I don't know which one to take. And it's like, okay, well, you can walk down all of them, see if that path seems more likely to bring you to where you want to go or not. And if not, no problem. That path's closed. That's fine.
I relate really with this entire story because I have a very similar story. 25, quit my job, and then I'm like, I will do my own thing. And then you go through
Yeah.
that same phase where you were like, okay, I'm excited about too many things. Try a lot of things, but then you're like, I'm bored of chasing
Yeah.
little highs. I just want to find that one long term thing that once I start, I can keep compounding. And you know that
Yeah.
compounding, the magic is in 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years. And I'm like, what is that one long term thing that I can commit to right now? Um,
Yeah.
how did you find that for you? And I think just being okay with uncertainty every single day, because you see your friends everywhere who have a lot of certainty that, hey, your next promotion coming up in 2 months, next promotion coming up in 3 months. But for you, it's your roadmap is something that you are planning in your head all the time.
Yeah. So I think in terms of compounding, I think the most important thing to focus on compounding is yourself, especially when you're young. And I think, I was just having this conversation with someone yesterday. It's like, how do you balance all of that with private equity? Right. And like, I wrote basically probably 1,000-page book of just my own thoughts when I was going through this. And all my friends are like, how did you do this? Right. And you have to make yourself the priority. Figuring yourself out, becoming who you're capable of being, fulfilling your potential, probably for life needs to be your full time job, even when you've got a wife and kids, right? Because it all comes kind of from you. You're, like I said, you're the ultimate asset. The better you get, the better you can help lift up others around you. And the trouble is like, yeah, you're working, 60, 80 hours. How do you spend time doing this? And it's like, well, you have to commit to working on yourself the most, because this is the most important problem that you'll ever solve. This is the most important asset to work on. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, talked about how the first hour of his day is your best brain capacity. And he was going to spend that on him. And that's how you kind of have to think about it. And the way I think about it is like, you will get everywhere you want to go, but you just need to focus on improving yourself. Like, the way you level up in life is you figure out, okay, I see myself here. I see these things. I see this success or whatever, these interactions. I can feel that I'm capable of that. I call that the sexual tension between where you're at in life and where you think you're going. And actually, this was probably my most recent actual serious Twitter post, was how to close that gap. Because when I was in this quarter life crisis, I could feel that there was this big life out there for the taking for me, and that I was capable of so much more. But how do you get there? And it comes from just a relentless focus on yourself and getting better. Because if you want things that feel like they're a level above you, my old MD used to always say we have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And it's like, that's how you have to do it in life too. You have to work on yourself to become more valuable, so that now you are on the value level of the things that you want, because then you're an equal attraction with them. And so all these things There's a great quote from Big Sean that working on yourself doesn't take energy, it gives it. It's the source of your energy, because it's like, I think that the root of all of this is like there, and this is what I'm creating content to do, is to give people the playbook to do this work. Because the self work, the self exploration, this just focus on relentless, I call it relentless pursuit of excellence. They instill that in you in USC, and it's self excellence, right? But there's no one to teach you that. They don't teach you that in the training the street guides. They don't teach you that in the M&I guides to get into banking. College doesn't even teach you that. Business school doesn't teach you that. And what it means is you have to like, kind of walk through what I call what worked for me is when I was talking about like you're trying to just jump from firm to firm. And then you realize, all right, none of these are going to be any different and make me happy. So you just have to completely step back and reassess. And it actually starts with self-love, repairing your relationship with yourself, or maybe even for the first time creating a relationship with yourself. Like I grew up, I was lucky to grow up in a family with unconditional love. Like I always thought, I always liked myself, but it's like self-love is different. It's how you talk to yourself. Most people go throughout the day talking trash to themselves. They wake up in the morning, they grab their belly fat. They're like, oh, you're fat, you're ugly, you need to lose 5 pounds, you're not good enough. And to take your own path in life, it's going to be scary. It's going to be dangerous. You're going to subject yourself to criticism. People are going to judge you. Your own friends are going to make fun of you. It's not mean. It's just what happens. And how are you going to keep going if you agree with them and talk shit to yourself? It'll never happen, right? And that's then like the cornerstone to confidence. And your new life has to be full of confidence. There's just no other way. Confidence determines everything, right? And then confidence really comes from, it's hard to become truly confident. It's easier to just embrace the idea that I'm okay failing, because to get to where you want to go, failure is part of the process. And you don't become confident by like becoming unafraid. You'll always still feel nervous butterflies. Those are actually a really good indicator of what you should be doing. You become confident when you just don't let that fear stop you. Instead of dying with the what ifs, I just committed that I'm not going to die with regrets and with what ifs, right? And then so the reason I say all of this is like, now once I call them like mental muscles. Your mind is a muscle that you have to train to get stronger and stronger. And the more that you love yourself, the more that you're confident, the more that you embrace taking risks, the more that you remind yourself that like in 200 years we're all going to be dust. Why wouldn't you go for it? And the reason I say all this is like, that's the mindset that you need to get in to now think about what you want to do with your career, because you'll start thinking of things completely differently. Instead of just like, oh, I'll go to this other firm, or maybe instead of doing Series Bs, I'll do Series A. It's like, that's how you get to the step function change of where you want to go.
When you use step function change, because I use that term a lot. But anyways, have you heard about this book, Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zeland?
No, I haven't.
No,
What's it
it's pretty
about?
much the same concept that you're talking about, sexual tension between you and your goal, which is
Yeah.
the more you give importance to your goal, the more it's just like putting someone on a pedestal. You are creating a potential energy difference between you and them. What should ideally
Yep.
be is just reduce importance, and things should be just flowing because you are at
Yep.
play. And I'm guessing you are talking around that.
Yeah, I mean, like a big focus of the past 2 years for me is like learning about the law of attraction and manifestation and all that stuff, like books like The Secret, Ask and It Is Given, all of Neville Goddard's teaching, like it's all super important, right? And I guess if there's like, there's some themes that I've learned, because like I just tried to study like what works from people, right? And it's like, okay, if Tom Brady does affirmations, if Big Sean, if Kobe Bryant, if all these people are talking about the law of attraction, manifestation, how important that is, it's like, maybe you should do it, right? If Tom Brady he literally wrote his affirmations before his 8th Super Bowl, maybe that's something you might want to try. And I think what's important is, especially in all this stuff, is like working from the end state of your goals. That's what I talked about, like seeing yourself where you want to be, but you don't just like clip your heels and like transport there. like the Wizard of Oz. You have to do the work, but you can do the work. You can treat the work like it's a big weight on your shoulders, or you can treat it like it's part of the dance. And you can just take out all the stress and anxiety from your life when you just commit to just knowing what your future holds. It's all going to work out for you. You've got an amazing future coming your way. So just enjoy the process of getting there. You know, that makes it so much more joyful to do the work. And then your work gets way better because it's made with joy and love and fun. And what do people want? They want to be entertained. They want to feel seen. They want to feel supported. They want stories, right? And so, Joe Rogan had a really good quote of like, pretend there's a documentary crew filming your parabolic rise. And so the way I journal in the morning is writing from the end state, feeling the feelings of having it. I'm on my yacht in Cabo with all my friends. Like we're going off to dinner. Feel those feelings of what you want manifesting itself. But then go about the day and do the work that the documentary crew would film you doing. Being on this podcast right now, right? Writing the Twitter threads, writing the content, engaging with people. And it's important to feel the joy of the work because that's also the energy level. And then one other piece I was going to talk about that you kind of brought up is I think, this goes back to my prior point about making yourself the full-time focus. If you also think about energy levels, the person that is only going to half dip their toe into their true passion project. Oh, I'm going to work on it on the side. Maybe they're putting in 10 hours a week. That's pretty good, honestly. 2 hours a day at night is pretty good. But the person who jumped in full force at it and is spending every waking minute of every day, not only are they going to get a lot better than you so that they're going to more quickly level up, but if you're the universe, who are you going to decide to bless? Who deserves it more? Who wants it more? It's pretty obvious, And it's like you can't get there by only making it the side thing. This guy, Felix Dennis, this legendary founder, Tanner, I'd recommend people go watch his speech on YouTube. I can link to it after this. But he talks about go after the main man.
What's the name?
Felix Dennis. He was like the
Felix
founder of like
Dennis. Oh
Maxim
yeah. Oh
magazine.
yeah.
He wrote the
Oh
book
yeah.
How to Get Rich.
How to Get Rich. Yeah.
Really, I mean, it's funny. Like, imagine if Felix was alive in this day and age. He would have the best podcast ever. I almost wish he'd put out more content. And I mean, I guess that's like an interesting place to go too. Is like how I think I've realized that I've been blocking myself. If you want to go there,
Let's go there.
okay. So in there's a lot of schools of thoughts you have to tap into when you're doing your own thing and trying to make things work. And I think that's like, that's a really good example of why I'm a huge proponent of starting your career in finance. You learn such valuable skills. You learn finance. You learn how to invest. You learn what makes a business good or not. You understand business models, right? But at the same time, you have to know you have to be very smart to know how to be the right level of dumb. And I realized that I was blocking myself because I was trying to turn this content into a business, right? And I was like, oh, you know what? Before I put out my best ideas, I'm going to have to do these like cohort trainings, or I was like paywalling my own stuff. And then there was this kid, Ben Bader, who died. I don't know if you ever came across his stuff on Twitter. He was great and created a lot of content and really tragically, unfortunately, passed away at 25. He lived in the same building as me in Miami, like a really happy kid. I'd only met him a couple times, not claiming to be his friend, but like I learned a lot from him. And he unfortunately passed away, and seeing the outpouring of love made me realize what I've known all along is that it's about having an impact. And your main mantra needs to be giving away your gifts. If you feel like you have something to share with the world, whether it's learnings, whether it's storytelling, whether it's art, music, whatever, energy in my sense, like you have to give that to the world, right? And the world will handle all the business stuff. And I was blocking myself because I wasn't doing the best things for the audience because I was like selfishly trying to make a business. And so I just started unloading everything, 3 weeks ago, and my following's 6x. That's probably how you found me. And it's like, that's, I think when you get real deep into like all this stuff with like Rick Rubin, he was a huge inspiration. It's like, you're creating the best art with the most joy possible. And then let whatever happens after that's out of your control.
Love Rick Rubin. Can we
He's the
dive into that?
best.
Like, how did you find about him?
Yeah.
It's actually so cool. Like, you know, I have a bookstore that's my favorite. It's like somewhere over here, Main Street, and after a long time, I went there, and it was Johnny Cash. It was Johnny Cash's biography, and I'm like, oh, really cool. I heard about Johnny Cash through Rick Rubin. And then I opened the index and there's a chapter called Rick Rubin. Why?
Wow.
Because Rick Rubin was the reason that he got back. I don't know the exact story, but he went into depression and Rick Rubin brought him back into the scene. So, how important is this
Dude.
person in Johnny Cash's life that there's a chapter named after him in his life? Yeah.
I mean, I think basically everyone from that genre and still today, like he's got a great documentary called Shangri-La. I think it's on
Okay.
maybe
I haven't
HBO,
seen.
but
Okay.
like you should see it. And um, I mean, there's a quote that really stuck out to me from Mac Miller. And Mac Miller, from working with Rick, gave a great quote. And he said, "It's been an interesting journey to realize that the goal is to be as much me as possible." And that, even like, as I was talking about these big blocks, it's like, I think I've been struggling. I'm mad that I don't have more followers. I feel like I deserve way more from what I've been putting out. But I think I was trying to create content, create these hooks, like all this, which isn't me. I'm best in a conversation setting, telling stories, being real like that. And so that's been the flip to what I've been doing, is now creating content or writing threads. Like, I create content as if I'm on a FaceTime call with you or a friend. I've got my friends literally on the wall behind me and I just pretend I'm talking to them and telling stories instead of like threads. Right. And I mean, I've learned so much from Rick. He's the
This is
best.
so interesting. So interesting. I think even for me, I have been pretty much doing the same thing. All right, focus off my camera. Perfect. All right.
Yeah,
I've been pretty much doing the same thing. And there's one thing that really worked for me, which is the moment when you write before go to bed, there is this point where you are kind of, your brain is kind of processing all the inputs from the day.
for sure.
And those 15 minutes right before you're going to bed and you are just like dark, really quiet silence, and you are trying to process all the inputs, that is when a lot of ideas kind of like intermingle for me. And that's when I
Yeah.
start to use that a lot. Like if I have to give a
Yeah. Yeah.
presentation, a talk or something, I'm like, okay, I'll spend my entire day just gathering inputs and writing things down, but the real way of connecting all the dots will come in those 15 minutes when I'm just before about to go to bed.
100%. That's actually like, I don't exactly know all the science, but like I know that's like when certain different brain neurons are like really firing like different alpha waves or something like that. And that's a really important time for like manifestation. People talk about like focus on the one thought you want to manifest or like a problem you're trying to solve right before bed. And then when you sleep, you let your subconscious work it out. And a funny story, actually, I was just home for Thanksgiving. And my like sister got up to use the restroom or something and saw that my lights were on at the film night. And I was on my phone writing things because I had ideas come to me in my sleep. And it's basically this idea about, I talked about how your mind's a muscle and I'm training people to get a mental six pack. And it's those things that you talked about at the front, right? Self-love, confidence, your mindset, right? How to figure out your career and find your purpose. I teach people how to invest because that's what I love to do. And then of course, like dating is so important. It's the driver of, that's the biggest
Humanity,
decision you'll
society.
make in your life. Right. And it's
Yeah.
like, if you don't get it right, your life's going to be a little bit uphill dealing with the divorce. And if you get it right, you're going to live on cloud nine.
No,
But,
totally.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever, heard of this rapper, Russ.
I have.
Yeah, he was really the first person that like got me into all the manifestation stuff. He had a podcast with Jay Shetty from 2021 that that really changed my life. Like,
We talked about this.
starting like,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. And, it's funny because it's like, I love drawing inspiration from Russ, from Rick Rubin, from Big Sean, from all these people. Like, really what I enjoyed, Pete Carroll was a huge one. The legendary USC coach, won the Super Bowl with
Hmm.
the Seahawks. And it's like, you realize that these guys all have the same processes and it's all the same stuff. If Russ is talking about mindsets and visualization and Pete Carroll is talking about doing that with his Super Bowl team. And that's what Rick Rubin works with his artists on. It's like you start to realize like, all right, maybe this is actually the code and you got to take it seriously because like no one brings that up to you at Thanksgiving. It's like, hey, have you considered like seeing yourself in a better light so you can be more confident? No, of course not.
Interesting. What are specific? I'm guessing you have read the book Creative Act.
I actually haven't read the book. I listened to
Okay.
most of his podcasts, but I
Okay.
want to read it. But I can go through some of my favorite Rickisms.
And I'm curious, like, what are specific things that you have implemented in your flow, in your workflow?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is this focus on yourself. Rick talks about make the thing for you. You're the audience. Make it to the best of your ability for what you want to express. And however the audience perceives it, that is not a you problem. You're making what's true to you. And if you do that, that's all you can do as success, right? And he gives a really good example. The first movie in a sequel tends to be the best performing one because the directors just made the movie that they thought the audience, they made the movie they wanted. But
Okay.
then a movie has success, right? Happy Gilmore 2 is a great example. I didn't even watch it, but I heard like it was just, cameos thrown everywhere. They try to then make a movie that the audience will like and solve for something they can't control. And that's not making true art. That's business. That's commercialism, right? And it doesn't work. It's no different than like Steve Jobs talking about how you get nothing done in product focus groups, right? You have to make what the audience doesn't know that they want. And
Hmm.
it's like, I think about that for me. I talk about my struggles, what I was going through in my journey. No doubt, of course, people resonate with that. And if they don't, that's honestly not my problem either, because like another part that I think about with Rick, he talks about everything is a diary entry. And this is like another thing about creating, but really this changed me to live life. He's like, you're just expressing yourself today as if you're writing a journal entry. And you can take so much pressure off because if I'm just writing my journal entry today, I'm like, okay, today is December 3rd. Here's what's going on today. I'm not trying to be like, this is the best day of my life. This is a Wednesday in December. And so that's true and accurate and reflective of who you are and where you are. And some days you wake up and you're like, I'm going to take over the world. And some days you didn't sleep that good. And it's like, you know what? Maybe only I can put out 80% today, but if you just put out the best you can do today, that's all you can do. And really what's more important is I think like this is probably what's like been the biggest thing for me in my life is really leaning into the energy that I have. The end result of all this transformation that I went on is now people being like, you have such magnetic energy. And I made a tweet that went viral because I talked about how the greatest accelerant in your life is your likability. Nothing takes you further than being someone who people want to be around. Someone who's interested in people, someone who people are interested in because they connect the world for you. And all that comes down to is your relationship with yourself. How you feel about yourself. That is what creates magnetism because most people are reliant on other people to tell them how they feel about themselves. So they're always needing external validation. They're posting things, hoping other people like them. They're trying to say the right thing in dates so that people like them. And when you just decide that you like yourself, you don't need external validation. Deion Sanders has a great quote. He's like, I already like me. I'm not playing to try to get you to like me. I already like me. I'm good. And that is like where you need to get into the mindset of, and, even going back to like the finance interviews. In interviews, people try to say the right things and say what the firm wants to hear, right? And that might get you the job, but does that get you to the right place? And going through all of this, I changed my approach. And this is now the approach I have in life, in business and creating content and dating, whatever. This is who I am. I am who I am. Take it or leave it. What you see is what you get. I try to express the true maximum version of myself. So like, I don't want anyone to be surprised about that. And it's like if you try to act like someone to get a job or be in a relationship, and that's not true to who you are, that's a bad situation. It's honestly much better for them to be like, hey, I saw your true colors. I heard exactly what you want out of this job, and we're not a fit. And that should be good because you're like expressing, like, hey, this is what I want. This is what I'm interested in. This is like how I like to work. And if they tell you you're not a fit, you're not a fit. And so that's good. You wouldn't be happy. It's not a fit, you know? And that's like, I think where like Rick has been super helpful is like everything you have to do is just an expression of who you are right here and right now as to what's true to you. And however the audience perceives it, that's fine.
That makes sense. Makes sense. Do you think that one has to go through this lonely period to figure out, first of all, that, okay, what do I want, and build that relationship before they have this personality or before they have this thought process?
I mean, in my experience, yes. Maybe you can do it while not being lonely. But for me, it was very helpful being lonely, to
Yeah.
add to the piece of my quarter life crisis, right? Like I was in private equity, unhappy. This was in August. So I just gotten, fat private equity bonus, right? Doesn't make you happy. Same time, my girlfriend of 6 years dumped me. And then unfortunately, her father and my grandma passed away. So it all kind of came crumbling down at once. And despite having great friends and family who is of course there for me, you're lonely because you're just going through things, you gotta do it yourself. Everyone's there for you. They can help you. Post Malone had a great quote that he said, take all the love that you're offered. And it's like people are there to help you and they want to support you. So take all that love and help it. But ultimately, you have to get yourself out of this storm. No one's gonna be in the storm with you. My buddies aren't just like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm gonna break up with my girlfriend too. So we're all in this together, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like
Yeah.
what was helpful is in the loneliness, in a good way, it makes you be selfish.
Hmm.
And the Peloton instructors always talk about how self-love is never selfish. And I think in taking this real period to work on myself, although certain decisions, moving across the country to Miami is in some ways a selfish decision. That's not the best. My family wasn't jumping for joy that I was going to move away. Same with my friends. But you become such a better person that can bring so much more joy and life and love and just more vibrancy to their day-to-day life that you can't say that that wasn't ultimately the best thing for them. If you can work on yourself to have more love, to be more positive, to be happier, right? You infect the world around you in a really positive way. And what's important about like kind of having everything crumble around you, and by the way, like I understand that these quarter life crisis problems I went through are that, that's I'm very lucky that those were considered a big problem at the time. There's far worse problems. And for anyone going through that, my heart obviously goes out to, you know, I I understand that I was lucky, but at the same time, those were problems for me that I had to solve. And it was a big deal. I was heartbroken. I was very sad. I went through like a 6 month, period not being myself and working on it. And it's almost important to go hit rock bottom at least once in your life because it's in that period where you're stripped away from everything. You feel like it can't get worse, and it probably can't. And so you face a decision to just use you're at the bottom. I felt like a loaded spring. Use that fuel to just springboard to the life that you're meant to go to. Use that as rocket fuel to change everything. And it's like, it's almost the best to have a blank sheet of paper. That was what was so great about my experience in Miami. I didn't know anyone. And so you move to a new city. You know, I was previously living in LA. I went to USC. Everyone knew that I was cool at USC and the good fraternity. From there, people knew I was in San Diego from a good family, all that. You move to Miami, no one knows who you are. And you have to rebuild your life from scratch. And it's in that purpose, or it's in that journey that you realize what you're truly capable of. And that was really the growth for me because like I remember my first goal when I moved to Miami was to make 10 friends. I ended up befriending the whole city. And that's when I realized, like, oh my gosh, I think maybe my greatest superpower is my energy. I got to create content. I got to help people. I got to share this energy with the world because that's what's going to take me the furthest.
I'm curious, what was the emotion like? Changing, uprooting your community is really hard. So what was the primary driver over there to move away from West Coast and come to Miami? What was the
Yeah. I
main
mean,
driver of that decision?
I think it was just this time where it's like, you know what? Everything kind of like came to an impasse where it was a really good opportunity to just kind of do something with your life. I felt like I love Southern California. That's always home. I'll probably end up in Southern California, but it's like, okay, am I never going to have moved somewhere in my 20s? Am I never going to explore the East Coast? And it kind of all just stemmed from this decision. It was what I was talking about earlier. Like, it's hard to become truly confident. It's easier to just be like, you know what, I'm not going to like, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on this, but I'm not going to spend my
Go ahead.
life being a pussy,
Yeah.
you know? And it's like, I had a great job opportunity down there. I went and worked for this really cool company, Palm Tree Crew, and that came from being super truthful in my interviews. We had just many interviews where I was like, hey, this is really what I want to do. And I found like a perfect job opportunity for me. It was an amazing experience. And everything kind of lined up. And eventually it was like, my dad was like, it's good enough, take it. And I always kind of figured like, say the experiment failed. And I think this is really important for the audience too. Say the experiment failed. It's important to consider how bad failure actually looks like. If I moved to Miami for a year, didn't like the job, didn't make any friends, found out that I hated going on boats and drinking Aperol spritzes, and that it just wasn't a fit, you can just move back. And, okay, I moved back to LA, or say I fall even flatter on my face. You got to just move home for 3 months. You can just get right back on your feet and basically put yourself back into the exact same situation that you were in. Go get the same job, move back to the same apartment, whatever. And it's like when you're 90, looking back on your life, you'll probably forget that you even lived in Miami for a year. Like, oh, wow, that memory popped up. I can't believe that. Or you might look back and be like, this was the one move that changed the entire trajectory of my life. And that was the case for me. And it's very important, honestly. There was a TikTok trend going around that in your 20s, there's going to be a plane taking you away from your
Mm.
hometown. It's very important you get on that plane. And if I could push people to do anything, it would be to take that risk, because you'll never know what you're capable of when you stay anywhere near your comfort zone. And Russ, who I talked about, I learned a lot of things from. He talked about shaking the snow globe. It's perfect. We're recording this in December. You know those snow globes at the holidays that you shake them and it's a winter wonderland? And so you have to do that to your life sometimes. If you don't feel like pieces are aligning in the places you want, shake it up, because shaking it is going to be the exact thing that makes everything fall into place.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Love that mantra.
There's a reason I'm asking you this because I am in that same boat of shaking things
Yeah.
up. So this is very interesting. But do you think a changing environment is important? Because I definitely believe that if you if you have lived in an environment where everything has become a little bit neutral, a little bit bland, and then you
Yep.
suddenly move to a new environment and you just adopt this new lifestyle, you just for one day, if you adopt this new mentality that okay, I am the most outgoing person and I bring a lot of energy
Yeah.
into relationships, and that's how you build your first two friendships. So with that mindset on day one, that
Yep.
has a knock-on effect now, and in that
Yeah.
new environment now everybody knows you as this new guy.
I mean, I think it's huge. Like, I just moved back to LA. When I was here previously, I lived in Venice, and I kind of wanted to put myself into a new environment because it forces you to grow. I like this idea that, like, if you want to grow faster, you have to throw yourself off the deep end and force yourself to swim. That's how you get up the learning curve faster. And you have to find ways to do that in your daily life, whether that's moving to a new city, whether that's getting yourself out of a routine. And I think, forcing yourself to change environments is really beneficial, because it's like, if you get stuck in the same routine, there's no room for luck to happen. There's no spontaneity. The same people at the coffee shop. Like you said, like, if you are at a new coffee shop and you meet someone, a whole new node of connections now have lit up to you. and it's all people, and so it's like you can never have enough friends. And as it relates to environment, I think environment is one of the most important variables to control in your life or to optimize for. I'm not talking about, your sleeping temperature and blue light glasses. It's the people you surround yourself with. If your five best friends are all successful in shape, having fun, taking risks, living great lives, you're going to be the sixth. And the opposite's also true. If they're sitting on the couch, they're door dashing, they're, sports betting, playing fantasy sports, it's not going to be the best. And, so this is what I really learned from Pete Carroll. He created everywhere he's gone, he's created such an amazing an environment that brings out the best in people. And that's what you want to be in. You want an environment where you're pushed to be your best. And so much of what I'm creating now with my community is I feel like that's been lost. You know, Work from home's killed that. And even before that, I think even when I was working in finance, I was always like, how do I not have, more people taking an interest in my career and mentoring me? Like maybe, our parents did. Or if you think back to like 1980s, like Wall Street stock brokerage, you had these hard charging people all next to each other, all pushing each other to be better, but then also there for each other. Those eye to eye conversations, even someone older than you, like, hey, I know this is where you want to get, this is what you got to work on. Or if you were to get broken up with or struggling through a relationship, someone would take you out to lunch and be like, hey, it's going to be all right. This is how you're going to get through it. Right. And now we all fight these battles by ourselves. And I love this idea that what do you do to a prisoner who you're trying to punish? You isolate them. And what I realized when I was going through this journey and really what started sharing my content, why like I'm obsessed with bringing all the best people together is like, we all want the same things. We all struggle with the same things to get them. We all listen to the same podcasts, read the same books, read the same Twitter threads. Why aren't we sharing that? Why aren't we helping? Why is the default social media post your matcha? Why isn't it like what you're thinking about today, what you're struggling with? Anytime I post what I'm thinking about, someone's like, you got to read this book. Oh, talk to this person. I mean, that's easy street, Group projects were not only more successful, but more fun. And why don't we act like that in life? And I want to change that because, I like modeling things after like country clubs. Everyone's in there. Everyone's having fun together. Deals are going down on the course. Everyone knows each other's families. Kids are running around. Everyone's healthy and good looking. And it's like you're a product of your environment. And I think, where does that exist? Like a positive environment to help you push yourself to be the best. And so that's what I'm really focused on creating.
Can we talk more about it? How are you
Yeah.
creating this community around you?
Yeah. I mean, it starts with content. The content is the beacon to attract in like-minded people. That's been amazing about creating content. I think sharing yourself online is the greatest asset any of us have. The smartest people are on the internet, on Twitter. And if you share your thoughts, it's not uncommon that they like it. And you have no idea where it goes from there. I mean, the fact that we're having this podcast, you saw one of my tweets, you reached out, we chatted back and forth, we jumped on a call, we're doing this now. You have no idea where this is now going to take each of us or who's now going to come into our lives from that. And so just sharing content about what's on my mind and what I find interesting. And you use that as a beacon to attract in the right people. And then from there, I want to launch a podcast, much like you're doing, where it's like, okay, telling my own friends' stories, just like this conversation, but with my friends, because then that's how you kind of light up the network. The hardest part about community is it's not at a golf course. It's not like, hey, three of us are playing, let's bring Sean in as the fourth. And boom, now you know these three people. It's very hard digitally to make those connections. And I think the best way is like a podcast telling people stories. Because it's like, oh, Sean, and you can hit me up and be like, yo, I listen to your friend Jake's podcast. Connect, now we're connected, right? So that, and then, just right now it's like a WhatsApp group. And it's like, I want, there's a friction between you want to help as many people as possible, but at the same time, it asks,
WhatsApp has a
you're
limit
only
of
as good.
256.
Yeah, which we're approaching. And
Yeah.
you want people to be comfortable. And at the same time, the community is only as good as the weakest link. You know, of course I want to join Augusta. Augusta's not taking people like us at the moment. And so it's like, you know, that's a different thing with it. You know, a lot of people with communities, they just blow them up and like charge a bunch of money for it. But it's like, that's not valuable. The actual assets, the people. You know, I
Hmm.
want it to be like, hey, I'm in New York. Who's in New York? And people know that they can go grab beers with them because they're all vetted. And so with that, like it's been just more of like a side project with me and my business partner on it, of just using it as a mechanism for the cool people that we meet to just put them in there.
That's
But then
incredible.
it's
What
important for younger people because younger people are really struggling because COVID kind of ruined the college experience. And so they didn't graduate with the same relationships that we had from fraternities or just from being on campus. And I find they're very lost and very in need of networks and communities and very likely to like join these discords and stuff. But it's important that they're getting the right advice because it literally breaks my heart because you know, these 20-year-old kids call me asking for advice because they don't even go to college anymore because our college isn't going to teach me how to start a business. And I'm like, that's correct. It's not. That's not what college is about. You know, it's about friendships and relationships and connections to set you up. You go to work so you can learn about business. And you know, they're going all in just to try to make money because there's this idea that you need to be a 20-year-old kid making 100 grand a month. I'm like, I don't know any 20-year-old kids who did that. And so there's like, I want to create a community for those people where it's like we can nurture, you know, we can use ourselves as the magnet to then, you know, hand them off so that they can have the friendships and the relationships that we all developed in our 20s.
This is very interesting because what you are saying right now, and last night, the video that popped up on my feed, which was Scott Galloway notes on being a man. Have you looked into
Mm,
that book?
I haven't,
Okay. But
but
I'm guessing you
like
know
I
the
don't know if it's
premise.
similar to this. I, I don't know. I don't. Is it similar to like Way of the Superior Man?
Uh, no. It's
Okay.
so where the superior man is more philosophical, more focused on high level things. Notes on being a man is also focused a lot on the present day scenario because he's like a stat guy. He's also using
Yeah, yeah.
present day politics, economics to structure that conversation.
Yeah, so what are like some of the premises? But I mean, vaguely, I think like it's going to be very much so in line with
Exactly.
I think where
Exactly.
this
It's very
society
similar.
needs to go.
And yeah, it's just the approach is different, but exactly what you mentioned, like earlier, people would take the people would actually take interest in being a mentor for someone young and help them in their career and help them figure out that, hey, I know you were struggling with something. Let me walk you through this. And that is something that it's true that even I don't think I had someone like that in university. And when you see it, it makes a massive difference. It makes a massive difference.
Oh, I mean, it's really too bad, right? Because this idea of mentorship's been ruined by the core scammers who lived in my buildings in Miami. You know, the Lambos, the rented Lambos, the Rolex watches, the mentors, you know, pay me 5 grand and I'll help you. Unfortunately, that's not good for society because mentorship is one of the oldest traits of getting where you want to go. You know, it used to be apprenticeship way back in the days of how you became, you know, a blacksmith. And I've been very lucky that I've had a lot of mentors through my life. And each one of them, I can pinpoint very specific things to advice that they gave me that changed my life. And it's of, you know, it's so valuable because think of, you know, there's quality to information. You know, the more life someone's lived or the more success, the more things they've seen, the more they can opine and give you actionable, valuable insight. You know, it's very similar to think about someone who knows what they're talking about can give you a great stock pick. Someone who has no idea what they're talking about, their stock pick might lose you money. That's a drastically different outcome. Right. And so, you know, for me, mentorship's so important because I owe so much of my life now to mentors. And so I'm trying to pay that forward. Like I just turned 30 and I want nothing more than to arm these younger guys, girls too, with the knowledge that I learned in my 20s. I mean, I could you imagine how valuable that would have been? And there were many people I learned a bunch from. And so I'm trying to do that. And you know, my business partner and I, we're trying to arm this next generation of guys with that and be the right role models for them actually. Because, you know, notes on being a man, I think I think men are really lost. And I think it's, you know, I'm going to try to be PG and correct in this, but I think the meaning of being a man isn't really discussed often anymore in society. And I'm not talking about like, you say masculinity and people think about, the bodybuilders and steroids and supercars and stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. Being a man is being a strong leader. It's being good for your community. It's lifting all the other people around you. It's improving the energy of the world. It's being the rock. It's leading by example. It's doing things the right way. It's being the right person in your community. And I was lucky that I grew up with an amazing role model in that from my dad and from all the other people in San Diego. Like one of the best things my dad taught me is emotional intelligence. He taught me that it's okay as a man to have emotions. And he's like, how much of a man are you if you can't even face yourself? It's okay to admit, like, yeah, you know what? I'm struggling with this right now. We'll get through it, or to ask for help. And, so much of, I think, where men are struggling is men are really lost in all aspects of their life, lost in their career, lost in their purpose, right? And if you think about like being a man, it starts with being on a mission. You have some gift to give to the world, you have some purpose, and your mission needs to be your priority. But most people don't have that. They don't like their job, right? And there's that great quote that when you can't find a deep sense of purpose, you distract yourself with pleasure. And you look at the world, right? It's the degenerate economy, sports betting, gambling on crypto stocks, right? Even just like traveling all over the world for parties, scrolling on social media. And then so it's like, then that impacts your ability to be a leader. Because without all of that, what I was talking about earlier, you don't have self-love. You don't have, you can tell the difference when someone's fueled by self-belief or fueled by the need for external validation. And the world is completely in the latter. They need external validation, so they care what people think. They're trying to please people. They're trying to do the right things. They're asking ChatGPT what to say to a girl. It can't get less manly than that, right? And then that's now impacting dating because, as a man, it's your job to lead and to be like, hey, these are the plans. I made the plans. This is what we're doing, right? Obviously, be respectful. Don't be weird, all that, But that is when you're functioning at its best between masculine and feminine energies. Men and women both have masculine and feminine energies, but when you're at each of the poles, that's at its best. But men have no confidence. They're not taking the lead because they don't have that, and they're trying to do the right things, right? And so now it's like dating is collapsing because of that. People aren't having a good time dating. People don't believe in the ability to succeed in dating. So people aren't getting married. People aren't having kids. And this is like a massive problem. And the world needs better role models. So check the book out. But, it's something I'm going to talk a lot
Yeah.
about because like, it makes me sad that people are struggling with dating, and I don't want to be like I don't know, maybe I'll help people date. I've never thought I'd write the book on dating, but I can. And dating should be fun. It should be exciting. You're going through the journey of love to find the best thing that's ever happened to you. That should be fun and joyous. And the more you treat that with excitement and fun and that it's a journey, that it's all going to work out, the better it goes. But it's not going that well for anyone. And it's very hard to have a good life, like I said, when you don't have love and you don't feel good about your prospects for the future.
Totally. I think this is very interesting, like how we were initially talking about problems in a very isolated manner. That okay, there is a problem with obesity, there's a problem with people addicted to sports gambling, there's a problem with, let's say, housing crisis. There are all these different problems, but when you can connect all of them to this one idea that okay,
Yep.
maybe we don't love ourselves, we don't have courage, uh, we are not at play, we are taking things too seriously, and we are not living in a harmonious way where you are thinking that this is a different creature. No, it's a human. You can just go and have a conversation with them. And
Say
when
I.
you
It's
when
another
you
human.
think Yeah, exactly. When you think about, I think from these basic principles, everything is downstream of that. And I think that is same thing happening over here with your content, that people can see your content, which could be on different topics. But I think this conversation kind of can put into perspective that, okay, this is how you think, and all the content is downstream of that. So this is your
Yeah.
story, and all the things are downstream of that. So that is very interesting.
I mean, it goes back to this idea. The best way that I've been able to sum it up is that your mind is your most important muscle and you need to train it. And it's laughable the amount of time people spend guzzling supplements and sitting in the cold plunge and doing red light therapy to try to solve something. And it's like, if you just spent that time becoming confident, you would get the changes that you want in your life. And I think like what's so important, even as this whole optimization trend, what's crazy is it's taken the experience of life from the heart, which your heart is the organ to life. The minute the heart stops, it's over. I've seen plenty of people seemingly live without brains in my day-to-day experiences. But all this optimization, all this data, ChatGPT asking if it's the right thing to do has made it all mental. And so now everyone overthinks everything. And what good has all that overthinking done for you? Has it solved your life? Has it made it better? Or are you just now paralyzed with anxiety and uncertainty? And it's like we got on before we got on the phone, I was talking about how I came across this clip of Tyla, and this artist got he said Tyla was his celebrity crush. And so he got a chance to shoot a shot at her. And then they showed her the video, and the guy clearly just froze and had no confidence. And like his tone and his voice went like drastically from talking like this to like, "Hey, Tyla, this is our moment." And she was completely turned off, not only just by his energy, but like, "This is our moment" is like weird. Had he been like, "Hey, Tyler, I love your energy. I love how you present yourself. You seem so free and alive. If you're anything like that in person, we'd be dynamite. Like, we'd love to take you out." That's it, right? That's how you would talk as if you were talking to a friend. And I mean, it's just crazy how lost people have gotten in all their categories of life. And I like to like question people like, okay, you take all these supplements, you cold plunge, you sit at home with your eye mask. What are you optimizing for? Because it should be to have a good life. And to have a good life, it's all the other things you talked about. It's self-love, it's confidence, courage, it's risk-taking. It's an awareness of your own mortality, that we could get hit by a bus tomorrow. There's no point in not expressing love, in not going for it, in not leaving anything unsaid, you know? And when you understand all these things, you just start living a different life, because your perspective on life is just, step function change different. You're a new person. Straight up, it's like you have to rewire your brain.
Exactly.
One of the people that I worked with, he described it super well. He's like, when we all first got our iPhone, we thought it was epic because you could play Angry Birds. You can now have video FaceTimes with your friends from that same iPhone, and you didn't know what it was capable of. And that's like your mind. Like my friend and I like to describe it as it's like the feeling of like stepping onto a yacht or a private jet. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people live like this. And that's the same feeling once you do all this self work to rewire your mind to have it work the right way. You can't even comprehend the fact that, I haven't entertained a negative thought in months, years. You can select your thoughts like your clothes. And the more you just think good thoughts, the more you just bound through life. And the more you bound through life, you expect great things to happen. You walk into rooms knowing people are happy to see you. You know that your energy lights up the world. You can fearlessly express yourself. You throw yourself at the world, and the world receives you with open arms. Going back to that Tyler thing, it's all a mirror. Him talking so nervously and shyly is signaling to her that he's not worthy. Because someone like her, someone high value in dating expects a high value person. A high value person is going to be confident. They're going to think they're the prize too. And I mean, you think about like mental health as a whole and how little progress it's made. You know, it's probably gotten worse, right? You don't solve your mental health by doing calm for 30 seconds. I remember that when I was doing private equity, I struggled from alopecia. You know, it's a stress related illness where parts of your hair fall out. You have to fix the root cause of why you're stressed. And really, that's a life alignment problem. You know, like you can have infinite energy when everything you do gives you energy. But, you know, that's really what I'm focused on is like, how do you rewind? How do you train your mind to enable it to be the greatest force for good, to unlock the life that you're capable of? You know, this big life that you want for yourself, you're capable of it. You're capable of more than you can even think possible. And you only get there from your mind. You know, it's no surprise. What made Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Tom Brady so good? Their mindsets. It was called Mamba mentality. It wasn't Mamba vertical leap height. And it's like victory starts in your mind. And so that's what gives me so much energy to help people with. Like I want to be the biggest mind muscle trainer in the world. You know, be mentally attractive. I want hats that say that.
No, makes sense. Makes sense. It's every goal. It's just the same thing. Like they say that, okay, why should you have a goal to be a millionaire? Because it's not that the money will change you, it's that journey that will change you. And the
That
journey
you
will take you
become.
through
Yeah.
different phases where you will realize that, okay, I have to do this thing hard. I I can't be a pussy. I can't just like quit this. I have to do it. So if I have to do it, I'll have to try something new. I'll have to adopt a
Yep.
different mindset. At the end of the day, you realize that it is the mindset that you were looking to change. And
It's all mindset,
yeah.
you know? It all is mindset. It's all perspective. You know, because it's like even say something bad happens to you. You can view it as woe is me. Why did this happen? Or you can be like, you know what? This is a learning opportunity from the universe that they gave to me because I need to learn something and it's going to redirect me on the path that I'm supposed to be on. And you can just commit to the fact that it's all working out for you all the time. You know, the universe is working very hard to make you very happy. There's a lot of proof of that. And so if you know that, oh man, this happened and now, but it's like if this bad thing that happened to you, bad thing, leads you to the best thing to ever happen to you, then was that thing bad? Or are you grateful for it? And you can just have that perspective, you know, and it's like, even when you're talking about $1 million, you know, I think a huge thing, especially if a lot of your audience is in finance, right? Well, certainly you've made enough money and got enough status by now that it would have made you happy. And it doesn't. And you hear all these people, oh, make $1 million. And it's like, and then what? You know, what is $1 million now going to do for your life that you don't have at the moment? You know, you probably want it for more love. Are you just going to now be on out in the world like, hey, I have $1 million. Who wants to date me? And who are you going to attract from that? And is that going to work out? And it's all this stuff. Like, I think the mountain analogy you gave is great, right? The whole purpose to get to the top of the mountain is self fulfillment, you know, becoming the person that could get there. But the only issue is when you get to the top, you'd be willing to give it all up to just go back to the bottom and enjoy the journey again. You know, it's cliche to say it's the journey, not the destination. But how many people appreciate that until they're at the destination? It's too late. And I just wrote a blog post about this because this was probably one of the best thoughts that I'd ever had. I was in Cabo, my favorite place. And so I was there and I was talking to this guy. He just sold his company for $900 million. We're chatting in the jacuzzi. He was buying me drinks, obviously, that were on him. Really cool dude, you know, like he crushed it. You know, we all feel like we want to get to the end where we feel like we made it. And he obviously made it. 900 million, flew down private, house in Cabo, friends and family around him, right? And it's like, I had this thought after he left. And I'm like, if he were to offer me to switch places with him, would you take it? And everyone wants to get there. I want to be a billionaire, the house in Cabo, right? I want to make it. But who would have who would have been better off in that trade, him or me? If I was
Him.
him, I would do anything to come back and be in my shoes. 30 years old, the world is your oyster. You can do anything you want. You can make your life capable. I'm single. I still get to go through the greatest joy of my life, which is finding and falling in love. And it's like, don't forget that you're living the dream right now. The dream is living it. The dream is playing the game of life. And what you're searching for is just playing it. It's not the rewards. It's going through it is the reward. The treasure chest of life. Glenn Powell has a great quote that nothing's exciting if you know the outcome. If you know the ending, the movie wouldn't be worth the watch. And it's the tension that makes movies great. The feeling of, oh, it might not work out. All for them to ride off into the sunset and you're happy. But the climax is the most intense part of the struggle. And you have to keep that in mind, that that's the fun part.
Oh, this is very interesting. I had a very it's there is an idea. It's like, when you were a kid, you would hear all these incredible quotes or just quotes by incredible people. You don't really think about them, but then when you
Yeah.
actually truly experience it, you are like,
Yeah.
oh, that makes sense now. So when
Yeah.
you're talking about this chase journey, at first, maybe 2 years ago or 5 years ago, it would be like, okay, yeah, okay, he's just saying that. But once you go through that, like recently, one of my French teachers, he was like, the day I gave my exam, my TEF exam, which is when you hit all the requirements, one day I was happy, the next day I was sad again. And he's like, oh shit, I thought I worked for 1 year. I worked really hard on this thing. I thought this was it. And I worked hard. What went wrong over here? Like, I worked hard. I got what I wanted. Why am I not happy? And then you realize that, oh, in order to chase that one goal, you stopped living life because all you did was chase after that goal. What you
Yeah.
had to do was you had to use that goal as like one of your kind of like mission, that okay, that is your star, but then that doesn't mean that you're going to stop doing everything else. That doesn't mean that okay, you're going to stop focusing on your health and stop focusing on your
Yeah.
relationships. You got to
Yeah.
build everything towards that one goal.
Yeah. I mean, to your first point, like, all the cliches are true, but you can't accept them until you've experienced them. Money doesn't make you happy. Hear that all the time. You have to make money we can tell people money's not going to make you happy all the time. They're never going to believe us. The same thing. You don't know what you got until it's gone. You have to lose something, and it's like, it's the journey, not the destination. Take yourself back to college. You were so stressed about graduating and getting a job. 2 years in, it's 2 a.m. You're working at Lazard and you're like, man, we actually lived the dream in college, right? To your other point, I had this thought this morning. It's insane how temporary happiness is. You could just have had great news come in. And by the time you're done drinking your coffee and you've checked your phone, you're already worried about something else. And it's like, there's another great quote, I've learned a lot of things from these quotes. It's like, you already have the things that you thought would make you happy 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was 25 in my quarter life crisis, and I've solved that better than I ever thought possible. And it's like, are you happy? It's like, well, now you're setting yourself on, oh, now I got to have all these followers, make this impact right? The goals never change. The goals never go away. And that's good. You do need something to work towards, right? Like people say the worst case scenario is when you hit all your goals and now you have nothing to live for. People think you make $200 million and it's happy. It's like, well, what do you do with your life? Right. And so it's like, that's why the goal has to be what I talked about. For me, it's like a relentless pursuit of excellence for myself, for my life, for my people. And that means being the best person that you can be. And that's a lifelong challenge, but the challenge itself is the reward by becoming that. And I like this idea of even like growth without goals. Like, I don't set many goals for myself because I find them to be like inherently self-limiting. It's like I set this goal to make 10 friends in Miami. It's like I made 100,
Hmm.
And it's like just growth for the point of growth. Each and every day, just try to be the best that you can be. Doesn't matter what someone else can be, it's you. And if you did that, you can go to bed happy and proud of yourself. That's all you can do. But you can't think that, like, nothing external is ever going to make you happy internally. You could solve all your problems, right? You could be waking up next to the love of your life with the beautiful family, taking your kids to school. Everyone's happy. It's a nice, loving household. And if you saw some Instagram post of someone else on a yacht that's bigger, it's like there's always going to be someone with a bigger yacht. And you can't do it for those things. And one of the things that I like to think about in life is that life is like a GPA. If you get, everyone thinks, oh, if I get money, I'll solve everything else, right? It's like, okay, say there's 4 classes in your life: money, health, relationships, and how you spend your time, freedom. If you get an A in money, say you became a billionaire at the expense of all other 3 things, that's a 1.0 GPA. And you would fail out of college. And if you're like, you know what, I'm going to try to get 2 A's, 2 B's, you're on the dean's list. That's a 3.5. You crushed it, right? Even if you get a B in money, you're going to be very wealthy, all things considered, right? And if you can do very well in all the categories, that's what's actually puts you in the top 0.01% of life. You don't win life by having the most money. There's probably the majority of very wealthy people are very unhappy. You win life by having an amazing life. And life is the sum of everything. It's life, right? That's everything.
Where do we go from here, Cole? What are you investing in?
Um, I don't try to get too cute with like the stock picks. I mean, I think, my like philosophy investing, it was from this guy, Terry Smith of Fundsmith, very successful British investor. And his strategy was super simple: buy good companies, try not to overpay, and then do nothing. And I've adopted that to buy good companies, try not to be dumb, and then log off and live. Best on the third piece, the best thing to do is often nothing. AI was over 2 weeks ago, it's back. There's a great Fidelity did a study. Their best performing accounts were from people who were either dead or didn't know they had an account. And then that leads me to the second point. All managing money is not trying to beat yourself and doing all the stupid stuff and like having hot stock picks. That's what I love about investing is it's a game against yourself. It's just like all this mindset stuff we're talking about. Can you control your emotions? Can you stay level-headed? Can you ignore the noise? And it's like we all get so caught up in trying to get rich quickly. It's all emotion. And I think back to all the mistakes that I made. I tallied it up. I think I cost myself $1 million in mistakes in my early 20s. I mean, in fact, it's even more because it's like you get caught up on the next hot thing from the pandemic. It's like Teledoc. Um, what were some other ones? Like Fastly was a company, Zoom.
Ashley,
And
crazy.
right, Fastly, I
Yeah.
wrote that up and wrote it down. And it's like you start getting so emotional thinking you're going to make so much money from this. And at the same time, we all knew that NVIDIA was a good company, right? That was like my top 6 holding. But instead of putting more money into NVIDIA or Facebook at the time or Google, Microsoft, you put it into these companies trying to get rich quick. And how do we all say we put 20K into NVIDIA 5 years ago? I think that'd be worth $14 million right now. So it's like, and we wouldn't even be doing this, And it's like,
No, we'll be doing this
you
in
cost your,
Cabo.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's for sure. We'd be doing this in common. That's actually
Yeah,
a good point. It's like, this is actually what I love to do. And this is what I want to do. Like, I don't worry
exactly.
about money. This is what I like to do. But, I meant we wouldn't be doing this in what are our stock picks.
Right.
Um,
Oh, okay.
and then so it goes back to the point of just buy good companies. I like to think of, that's what I was talking about with private equity to start. And I think of good companies like people.
Hmm.
And a great mantra for life that I live my life by is find the freight trains and get on them and own enough to make it count. Think of this destination that we're all charging to, whether it's people or investments. And it's not rocket science as to who's going to have the best life. It's an extrapolation of their life right now. Who takes the best care of themselves? Who invests the most in their relationships? Who's the happiest on a day-to-day basis? Whose energy do you want to be around? How does that energy pull great things into their lives? Who's going to be the partner that you want to raise your kids with, that you want your kids to adopt their characteristics, right? This is not rocket science. And so find those people and own enough to make it count. Make those people your best friends. Those are the people you should want to date and put a lot of effort into, because there's no limit to how good people or companies can get, right? That's the beauty of compounding. And you don't need to own them all. You just need a couple really good ones. You just need one person to be the love of your life and have the most amazing life with them. I mean, I'm lucky. I think people think I'm kidding when I say I have 100 best friends. Then they go out with me and they realize like it's probably closer to 200, but that's, I mean, that's so important, people that you spend your time with. And so it's like, as it relates to investing, like it's not rocket science, right? What the best companies are at the moment. And they're going to continue, they're the only ones that can spend on, it's very clear, like who's going to win AI, or not very clear, but like there's only a couple of people that if you have to spend $1 trillion, there's only a couple companies that can do that, right? And then it's like, I think about it, like to give you two examples, right? Like I think the cloud businesses are probably the best businesses in the world right now. AWS and Azure, Google Cloud. No matter what happens, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's AI, whether it's something we have no idea, whether it's, Neuralink, whether it's just e-commerce, that has to be hosted somewhere. And so these cloud hosting businesses are the pipeline to everything in the world. And it's very healthy competition, right? They've all got 30 to 40% EBITDA margins, and they're all growing at very, very attractive clips, right? And you're very comfortable with that continuing. A company's not just going to be like, yeah, you know what, we're going to do a new cloud hosting thing. And it's so important in the world. When AWS went down like a month ago, the economy shut down. And it's like, that's how I think about things. Like, I really like to think of things, this is where banking and private equity is helpful. Like, it taught me the value of competitive advantages. The way I try to teach people about investing is there's really two factors, right? The rate of return and how long that compounds for. That's the inherent calculation with money and compounding, time value of money. Okay. Well, what can grow at an attractive rate for a very long time? And it has to be something where competition can't erode it. And so, like, what things are you unable to compete with, right? Like Visa and MasterCard are a great example of competitive dynamics. They're the credit card rails to the world. They're growing because people aren't spending cash, more transactions are happening online, and inflation. So things are getting more expensive. And all they need to do before the CEO of Visa even gets into the office in the morning, his company has processed probably billions of dollars from coffee, and it's not gonna, unless we redo the entire payment rails, which it requires merchants and customers to change their behavior, that growth is going to continue. Right. So it's important to think about that. And it's important to think about for yourself too. Like, how can people not compete with you because that's your competitive edge? Like for me, I like competing on vulnerability and authenticity. I'll talk about anything. Let's talk about getting heartbroken. No problem. It's my experience. I'm not afraid. I'm not ashamed of anything that's happened in my life, but a lot of people care what people think and want to present themselves in a certain way. And it's like people resonate with the authenticity. If I was posting from my Miami apartment, like all this stuff, yeah, watches, all that, no one cares. They care about how you can help them. So
Can we
anyways,
talk
that's a
about
long-winded answer.
getting heartbroken?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, look, to start, this all goes to like risk,
Yeah.
right? You have to risk your heart. It's, there's that old famous cliche. It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And at first, like, yeah, here, we'll go all the way into it because I have a lot of thoughts. At first, when someone I got broken up with after 6 years, I thought I was going to marry this person. I don't really know why she broke up with me, but she did it. Honestly, it takes a lot of balls for her to do that. And so, like, I respected the decision, honestly. But you're very sad. You're like, how could they do this to me? And it's like, I love the cliche that it's like when girls break up with you, they start talking to you like you're in HR, you know?
Exactly. They are really
And
good
it's
at
like,
women are really good at breakups. The
oh,
text
I was
message
like,
is great.
I don't understand how, unemotional this is for you, and how you can even be so rude and mean to me. Right. And it's like you're struggling to get closure and all that. And it's like you just got to give that all to yourself. It's not going to come. You're never going to get the explanation that you want. You got to just, move on. Right. And what's hard about heartbreak, especially after 6 years, but for anyone, is like it's like a death of the person that you were closest to. Like you spend 6 years with someone and now you never talk to him again. You'll maybe see him a couple times, but like we don't have a relationship anymore. And it's like that was your best friend for a while, and so it's like you gotta, it's like they died. And so the reason I say that is it's important to like mourn that. And I always thought about like I didn't want to have any bones buried for future relationships. I never, as a man, it goes back to that, right? You're taught to just suppress it. Don't talk about your feelings. It's like, well, I have a lot of feelings that I got to talk about. And I got to shout out my friends because I really couldn't have asked for like a better support group than my friends. Jack, Brooks, Ed, Jackson, Justin, Kobe, all my friends. And they taught me what it means to be a good friend, which is just to be there for people and to listen to them and to help them and to have fun with them. But it's like you have to go through heartbreak. And what it taught me, or the way I thought about it, is like people are heartbroken and they're bitter and they're upset and they're angry and they're resentful. And the way I thought about it is like, I want my heart to be the brightest, most vibrant color of red, pink imaginable. And holding on to those dark emotions makes your heart dark and black. And I didn't want that. And so what I did for myself, not for them, for myself, is I just took all the love that I had for them and I gave it to them. It was love for them. It had their name written on it. So I gave it to them as a final act of like expulsion so that I could clear out all that yucky energy out of my life because I want my heart to be the most vibrant color possible. And then the question became, well, what do I do with all this love in my life that usually was for them? My goal in the relationship, I wanted her to feel like she was the luckiest person in the world. You know, every day I wanted her to feel like she was on cloud nine. So, well, what do you do now? Like, where do you put that love that you have for someone? And you take all that love and you give it freely to the world. You give it to your family, you give it to your friends, you give it to strangers, you give it to your local barista, give it to the people that you see at the gym. You just give out all the love because it feels good to be in love. And you're still in love regardless of one person. And that you just give love without receiving. There's an amazing book called The Four Agreements. And this changed it all for me. I was visiting my buddy Connor Spears in New York. At his house, I saw this. I went to my favorite spot in New York, Jack's by Frida, and read it in like an afternoon, and it all clicked. And so you have to view your own cup of love as overflowing. Because if you think about it, it's all overflowing already. The love that you should have for yourself, your family, your friends, the people you interact with on a daily basis. And I'll come back to this because there's an important part. But you take all that love and you're already in a position of love. You have an excess. So just spread it. And you don't need it back because it's already overflowing. And I think people struggle because they treat love as a trade. I'll only love you if you love me. And that's not love. That's a trade. And I've given love to plenty of people and it hasn't come back from them. But it doesn't matter because it comes back in spades elsewhere. And that is like another important part of energy. When you do that, when you are just like, you can feel that energy from talking to someone that then they feed off of it and vibe with you and they give it back to you. And I think like one of the crazy realizations that I had from Heartbreak was I was on a run in Venice and I started crying. Just like out of the blue, started crying. And earlier that day, I'd just gotten a call from my soon to be boss at Palm Tree Crew. And he called me and he was doing the reference checks as part of my interviews. And he's like, "Hey, I want you to just know that I've done a lot of reference checks in my life. And your reference checks were the most positive I've ever heard. You know, you could just tell that people loved you and were excited for you." And what made me cry on the run is here I am focusing on the one person that decided she didn't love me instead of all the love that I have. And so I'd been sad because of the one grain of sand in my world that left. I was beating myself up over that, couldn't sleep, all that stuff. When there's a world of people that love me. And I started crying because I realized that in doing that, I was bullying myself. You think of like little you know, you're 8 years old on your elementary school playground. You know, that's who I am still. He's still inside me. And I was bullying him, forcing him to like eat shit of the one person that walked out of your life instead of all the people who choose to be there. And that was like a really seminal moment for me. Talk about like a step function change in how I loved myself. You know, that was self love, right? And it's like, even, you know, the worst part in a breakup is when, you know, they move on and they tell you they're seeing someone else. You know, you're like, who is this guy? You know, and you think of them making them happy. You just think all the worst thoughts, right? And I remember that happened. And, you know, I will say that, right? This was a really important person in my life. And we had an amazing time together for 6 years. You know, like we met in college. She was my college sweetheart for a bit. We had all these amazing memories. You know, I have nothing but love for her, like genuinely, truly, like really have all the love for her, so appreciative and grateful for our time together and all the memories that we shared, right? And people, you know, you go through a breakup and people try to delete that period from their life. They try to erase that memory. They try to cloud those memories. I'm like, okay, you know, think of your life as a book, right? She was a part of the story for several chapters, but she's not going to be a main player for the rest of it. But those chapters that she was in were better because she was in them. You know, all the memories and times that we had together. That's great. You know, I have nothing but fond memories from that. I'm not going to go back and delete this chunk of my life because it didn't continue on forever. That's insane. Life is way too short and precious to do that. And what's the point of that? You know, the story's better because they're in it. But anyways, well, fast forward. You know, she tells me she's seen someone else, and obviously, like that sucks. You know that your stomach just gets turned inside out. And I remember this was the root of how I rebuilt myself from rock bottom. Is I was like, you know what? Maybe he's great. Hope he is right. I want her to be happy, but I'm great. I'm not going to compare myself to him. He has to compare himself to me. He has to be in my shoes, and it's not even about that. I love who I am. I love what I bring to the table. I love my life. I love where I'm headed. You know, talk about a freight train. I know I'm going to have the most amazing, beautiful life. If she doesn't want to be in it, no problem. There's going to be millions of people who want to be in it. And I'm going to just focus on me. And it's important to realize, like, yo, some people might not like you. Who cares? You got to like yourself, and the people that like you love them. That's it. And that was the rebound of my confidence, is deciding for myself that I like myself, that I love who I am. I love what I bring to the table. Knowing that someone's going to be the luckiest girl in the world to be with me. Knowing how special I make people feel. Knowing the place that I have in people's lives. The people that stay in my life. And that's, you know, that's how I regenerated my confidence. And that's the focus. That's what I was talking about, is just decide that you like yourself, and then everything's downstream from that. So those are some of the best things that I've learned from heartbreak. It's one of the best teachers you can ever ask for in life, honestly.
I think I again re-heard this quote by Freud. The only two things happen to us are love and work. And many people talk about work, but not many people talk about love. So
Yeah.
it's good to hear stories. And hey man, you're definitely that was a good story. I was immersed in that story. So thank
I
you.
appreciate it. It's funny that like people don't talk about love or heartbreak, right? It goes back to like people post what they ate in a day. Who cares? People care about is love. And if they're not in love, they're maybe are broken or struggling with it. And it's like, why don't we talk about the things that we all think about? And people are always like, oh, you're so open to talk about the things that have happened to you. And it's like, well, the human experience is universal. Don't you think maybe someone else has been heartbroken? And like, what's embarrassing to talk about being heartbroken? Like, is a girl who I might be trying to go on a date with going to think less of me because I was happily in a 6-year relationship? Like, isn't that a pretty good signal that this is a good person to be with? You know, like, is it more alarming to be like, oh, this person's never had a long-term girlfriend or boyfriend? Like, isn't that a red flag? Right. And it's like, we don't talk about the things that we think about the most. Why? And if anything, what was so helpful, I talked about my friends, is I learned that it's really good to talk about your problems and what's going on. Because if you don't talk about them, how can anyone help you? And, I credit my friends, Alec Fisher, shout out him too. I would often just smoke cigars with them and talk, and they would listen. And one night we smoked, I think, 3 cigars in a row. We couldn't breathe the next day. Our mouths smelled like chimneys. I'm so lucky with our friend group because we talk, especially as guys. It's very rare. Girls are much better at that, I think. But guys are taught to keep it in and not talk, and it's not helpful. You can't suppress all that. You're going to crack. But, love it's the whole point of the game, you know? Like, it's not money. It's not status. It's not a nice car. You can have the nicest car in the world, and if you don't have any love, you're not going to be happy. It's much better to be driving down PCH in whatever car with the love of your life and the top down and the music blasting, you're singing along. That's what you want. And even, I love this idea of like planning for your death and working backwards. And it's very obvious to see that it's all about love. If people are at your funeral being like, oh, well, this guy's career multiple of invested capital is 4.5. He had a 78% IRR. He generated, $3 billion in shareholder value. It's like, all right, very nice. Like that was how you spent your life.
That'll
And
be
I want
very
to spend
funny.
it filled with love because I want people laughing and crying and hugging each other and telling stories. And like obviously I want to leave behind money and to set my family and generations up, but like you do that by being who you are. That's the ultimate way you set up your family. Going back to how to be a good man. That's what, as a man and then someday as a father, the real net worth is your reputation. That's how people take care of your kids and are invested in your family and treat your wife well. If you're a douchebag with $1 billion who's a dick to everyone, they're going to babysit your kids, take them to football practice, right? Are they going to, what's your wife going to be like, right?
That makes
So, I
sense.
mean, love can't be emphasized enough, right? It's the whole point we're here. It's like an inner game to the game of life. It almost, like nothing else almost matters. And it's funny because there's an amazing quote, really good finance book, by the way, for those finance listeners, called Richer, Wiser, Happier, by William Green. Really recommend it. He's got chapter 6 is on Nick Sleep. Nick Sleep is one of the best at figuring out the game of life of anyone. But there's a really good quote in there. And it's like, it's this investor who's talking about, he's like, my wife has no idea how much money we have. She has no idea if I'm down a couple mil or up 10, And it's important because the more love you have in your life, the less you need all these material things. And the opposite's also true. you get the sports car or the flashy purse or have to wear these clothes because you're trying to signal to someone to love me. That's all it is. It's all a billboard. Please, someone come into my life and love me because I can't be happy by myself. And if you have love, you don't need that. You don't need to do those things to get love. You have it. It's like trying to solve your life by accumulating money and possessions is like trying to satisfy your hunger by taping sandwiches to your body. It's all external, right? And it's like, it's an important question to ask. Like, what do you think you're going to solve in your life by getting more money? Like we talked about that earlier. But what do you think an extra $1 million is now going to bring to you that you don't have right now? And why is that the right thing to bring it to you? Why can't that happen with 1 million? Why is two the right thing? Like now, there's a really funny quote. It's like, yeah, bro, you'd be worthy of love if only you had bigger muscles and more money. Until then, you're shit out of luck. But that's what people think, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. What is the relationship between you and your father, and how was it growing up?
It was great. We're super close. My dad was super involved. And like what I admire the most about my dad is like he's a role model to this day. You know, kids will still ask him for coffee, and even some of my own best friends, they got him a cool ball marker that says top five dad. And so I'm really proud of the fact that my dad's a dad that people love to be around. And like I said, like my dad,
Really cool.
y- you know, what is amazing about my parents and growing up, especially from my dad, is they taught us like a really strong moral compass. There's a divide between right and wrong, and they really always treated us as adults and part of the family. We would discuss things, at the dinner table, and they were like, especially my dad. Like, I don't really recall him ever getting angry, except on the baseball field. There's one time, I don't know if you know the spaghetti move, but it's where they
Uh,
fake pick off to
yeah,
third and then pick off at first. And it was the all-star game, like the seventh inning, and I was the winning run. I got picked off at the spaghetti move, and I think he was going to kill me. But they never like raised their voice. They just instilled what it meant to be a part of our family, and we always felt like we were representing them. We were extensions of them, and that was what like made us behave and be good kids. And then, like I talked about, like, my dad was an attorney, and so he had a great career, but he was always present with the kids. And even like he, he tells us now, because I asked him, I was like, how'd you like balance all that stuff? Now learning what it means to be an attorney, I'm like, how were you always still the coach of the little league teams and stuff? And that's what I admire. Like, he was super present. He was the coach of the teams, like all that. Right. And I was like, he's like, yeah, at one point your mom sat me down and she was like, and this was, my dad was like a junior partner, like on a really fast track to be like, the mega lawyer. And he's like, your mom sat me down. And he's like, do you ever notice how whenever something happens to the kids, they don't ever come running to you? They run to me. And I give my dad a lot of credit, or I should probably give him more, is that was a decision he made of to not push it at the highest rate on the lower lawyer partner track and to be around the kids and to coach the little league teams, and I can't thank him enough for that because, having him around was so valuable. You don't even realize that as a kid, but like, and I loved having him as a coach too. We were just actually talking about this like a week ago, like he really, he obviously trusted me the most. And like, he loved having me as like a little boy. He called it me like his boy toy. Cause like he could just teach me all the sports and like, I was very good at them. And, he worked hard to like help in practice. But like we were talking about in eighth grade, we won our little league championship. And I remember he was like, all right, this was before the last inning. He's like, I need you to get on and I need you to steal second. And I need you to basically get home and score the winning run. And then I need you to go out and pitch and be the closer. And one of my best friends, this kid, Mark Detro, was the other team's best player, probably the best player in the league. And he was coming up the next inning. So sure enough, I scored and then I went out to be the closer. And Mark comes up, and Mark's like 6'3" at the time. He's huge. I think he hit the ball like 120 miles an hour, but he hit it right at the second baseman, and the kid made the play, and we went on to win. And the reason I say that is like not only in my dad's trust in me, but like sometimes kids hate when the dad's the coach because you ask the most of you. But he trusted me. He made me believe I was capable of it, and I've now love when the ball's in my hands in the biggest moments. That's why I quit private equity, right? I remember leaving private equity and like blasting music because I was like, oh my gosh, like the ball is back in my hands with my back up against the wall. I got to figure it out. No one's coming to save me. I burned the boats. Just like when you're a closer in baseball, like you either win or it's called blowing the save. You blew it. And so all that was amazing. And I don't know. I mean, I just am so lucky. I really just had the best childhood, grew up with unconditional love and an amazing family. And so, but it teaches you a lot, and like I said, like, I think why my dad's really admired is because he's always had a strong moral compass. He's always done the right thing and people call him for right advice. And he taught me to speak up and say the right thing, even when it's not popular. And that's a very important part of being a human, but also a man. And like, it's not just me, I have an older sister and like, she's so strong and it's amazing. She has probably an even better moral compass than me of what's right and wrong. And she's really wants to stand up for what's right. And she really believes in what's right. And I really admire that better.
That's a good point to end, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
I love this. I love this. This was great. Thank you for having me.